Welcome along to DigiShift 79, how AI and automation can boost your productivity. So we're going to be talking today about the practical sides of AI and automation. And we're going to look at ways that you can streamline your operations and make the most of your team's time. We're really lucky, the speakers that we've managed to get today. So we've got Edward Saperia and we've got Ella Shoup from the Civic AI Observatory, and they're going to be sharing some insights on successful AI integration for voluntary organisations. We've also got Russell Findlay from the Speakers Trust, who's their chief exec, and he's going to be talking about his organisation, how they use automation, AI, and no-code tools at the moment to achieve much greater efficiency. And we're hoping from today that these are approaches that you can adopt and adapt for your own organisation, and a range of no-code tools that we're going to be talking about today, and we'll be sharing throughout the session. So I'm going to hand over to our first two speakers, so Ed and Ella from the Civic AI Observatory.
Sure, let me just share my screen. Second. Okay. All right, can everyone see my screen? Okay, I'm gonna assume yes, because I can't see any emojis.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So thanks so much for having us. We are the Civic AI Observatory. This is an initiative by Nesta and New Speak House, which is sometimes known as the London College of Political Technology. And our aim is to help civic organizations plan and adapt to developments in generative AI. We have a core team, which is myself and Ed. I'm a researcher for the observatory, and in my day job, I am an AI policy associate at Holistic AI, which helps organizations scale responsible AI use. And I'll let Ed introduce himself.
I'm the Dean of the London College of Technology.
Great. Oh, so sorry. There we go. So at the Civic organization, we focus on practical insights for digital leads, case studies of civic applications of AI, examples of digital strategies and organizational policies, the impact on the job market, and we help to develop communities of practice for specific domains. That could include health, charities, local government, things like that. And we do this through providing a regular newsletter, so you can subscribe to us on Substack. We also maintain and populate a Google Doc, which is the Civic AI Handbook. It's a probably 100-page long repository of different case studies, job postings, applications, generative AI one-on-one lessons that you all can access and contribute to, and we can provide the link to that in the chat. And we also host WhatsApp communities where our readers and our advisory board exchange ideas and resources. It's very active if you'd like to join that. And lastly, if you're ever in London, we host events. Tonight, we're actually hosting a conference for different leaders in the civic space. And over the past 6 months, I think we've been doing this. We've been recording different applications of AI in the civic space. Here are some of the examples. So obviously, AI in medical services has been a very hot topic, and we're glad to see that the NHS has a community of practice that works on investigating and discussing how AI could be used in that service. We've also seen cultural institutions like museums think about how AI can be applied. You may have heard of the somewhat controversial case study with TfL and using an AI tool to detect people dodging fares. In California, the fire department has used an AI tool to try to detect hotspots. So seeing where potential wildfires could break out. And lastly, the city of Washington, D.C. launched a AI tool for navigating what is often a very messy repository of open data sets. So DC residents can use the tool to search for different open data. However, a lot of these are very large scale uses of AI, and we'd love to know anything that you're doing, however small, because we're actually lacking a lot of applications of AI in charities specifically. So if you are using anything or have a team member who's doing something cool, please let us know. And over the past 6 months, we've learned a lot of things, but I think the main takeaways that we have for you are 3 tips, I would say. So first, you should, at the very least, have an organizational policy, and it should encourage experimentation. That experimentation should never go unsupervised. So that's why we say experiment but verify. And lastly, you should know your tools. And by tools, we mean email, calls, chat, docs, Excel sheets, just the bread and butter of what you do every day and what AI integrations they might have. So be aware of that. And we'll delve into the organizational policies that we recommend charities or civic organizations in general to have. So the bare minimum we usually say is provide an internal policy on staff use of AI. So what you will allow, what you won't allow, what are the limitations, etc. The second is provide internal policies for the procurement of generative AI tools. So for example, OpenAI now offers a equivalent of an enterprise suite called ChatGPT Teams. And if that's something your organization is interested in, before you go through that, you should create a policy on what sort of the limitations of that should be. Third, provide internal policies for using generative AI in digital services. We have some examples here. Fourth, you should think about issuing public statements about your organization's use of generative AI. We've mostly seen media organizations do this, like The Guardian and BBC, but it would be smart for charities to do this as well. And lastly, you should provide policies for written submissions that are either for internal use or external use, such as funding applications. The example on the slide is from the Wellcome Trust, who, as far as we know, have been one of the only foundations to issue such a statement. And to expand on our earlier point about knowing your tools, you, again, should be aware of the AI integrations your tools have. And we've seen a couple of tools have successful-ish AI integrations, and we'll go through with that. But you may not have seen them yet, depending on what tier or plan that you have. So for example, if you're on a lower cost tier, you might not have the AI integrations yet, but they probably will come in the next 6 months. And we encourage you to just look at what your plan includes and if they've said anything about that as well. And so first, with enterprise suites, we've seen Microsoft 365 introduce Copilot and Google Workspace introduce Gemini. You may have already seen this. Some of it has come up in Google Docs, for example. Email's a very easy place for AI to be integrated. That includes Outlook, Gmail, the big ones usually. Calls, Zoom, Slack, Teams, all of those have AI integrations now. Same with chat, Zoom chat, Teams, Slack, Discord as well. AI assistants have AI integrations now. And we mean chatbots in this case. Calendar, so Calendly, Outlook, Google Calendar, file storage, Dropbox has an AI integration, Google Docs, different notes apps like Notion, all of these have AI integrations as well. Sheets, so Excel and different data synthesis tools that you can use on Excel. Those are slowly getting integrations. How useful these are is a bit uncertain. Slides, Google Slides, Canva, which we used for this presentation, those all have AI integrations now. Boards, so we need Miro boards, usually brainstorming sites, those will have AI integrations. Project management tools like Airtable, Trello, chances are you may have seen some form of automation and generative AI addition to that. And lastly, data and CRM, images and ads, and customer service. These are the last three big tools where we've seen a lot of activity when it comes to generative AI. And it may seem daunting, but the most important thing is that most of this is an extension of what you already have. So you may have seen on Google Docs, for example, text prediction getting better, or automated formatting. So you might see a button that says meeting notes or memos and things like that. And it'll provide a automated format for you that is generative AI, and that's quite familiar to what you might already have. So a lot of this isn't very scary high tech. It's just an improvement of pre-existing features. We wanted to leave you with an example of a potentially useful tool. We've heard people from our community use this Gmail plugin called Shortwave that makes your emails faster. So if you use Gmail, this could be helpful for you, and this could be a nice way for you to start experimenting and potentially increasing your productivity there. And lastly, thanks so much for having us. Please check us out at civicai.uk, follow us on Substack, join our WhatsApp communities, and hopefully you'll find what we had to say useful. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ella. That was great. Okay. So we're gonna hold questions for now. We're gonna hear from Russell Findlay, and then we'll get a chance for questions and discussion in the room. So Russell, I'll hand over. Russell has scaffolders outside his house, so we're gonna see how this goes. Hopefully it'll be seamless.
Thank you, and thanks for your patience if you hear drilling in the background. My apologies for that. We have two sets of scaffolding racing each other up the side of my building. I'm Russell Findlay. I'm Chief Exec of, I think what I've been advised to say is a medium-sized charity. To help give you a bit of scale, we turn over about £1.3 million. We reach 40,000 young people. And when you put those two numbers together, I'm quite humbled about the business model that we have and that the work my team do. And that's driven significantly by our automation journey over the last 6 years, our digital transformation, and increasingly how we're using AI. We are an education charity, Speakers Trust. We go to schools, both north, but mainly south of the border, delivering public speaking workshops. Our vision is a world where young people leave school with the confidence, the skills, and having had the opportunity to share their ideas out loud. 6 years ago, we were in a little bit of financial trouble. I moved into the organization and we were losing money quickly. And what was quite clear to us is that both funders and schools weren't able to afford costs, which we effectively were incurring to deliver the program. And we didn't want to compromise on the quality of the work we did. So there was an area of our expert public speaker trainers' fees that we couldn't change. So we had to look internally. And to look internally, we had to review every single process that we did and how we could take costs out of that. So the first driver of automation, Speakers Trust, is how can we do what we do, but in a cheaper way? Like many charities, we had Spreadsheets all over the place. We had people doing manual tasks. We sent thousands of emails to schools for lots of different reasons, and very little, if any, of that was automated. I won't tell you the whole story, but I'll give you the chapters. So we, first of all, consolidated our data, brought that into Salesforce. The problem we then discovered was even Salesforce admins require a little bit of technical knowledge. I don't think it's the most user-friendly application, but I do love Salesforce if anyone's on the call or watching. And what we really saw was we would need to digitally transform, but without an IT department. So we looked into how can we do that most cost effectively. Some of the integrations we were offered were going to cost £20,000 to implement. We simply didn't have that money. So we first of all looked at how we streamlined all of our operations. We used a number of no-code tools I'll talk about, I'm sure, in the Q&A to do that. And we've managed to scale from delivering to 20,000 young people, 40,000 young people, without increasing our real costs at all. The second thing we looked at was how do we transform our user journey, whether that's the beneficiary, our funders, or the schools that work with us. And I think one of the things there was around how we could automate our feedback. So we have a live dashboard on our website, which is fed by the 40,000 young people, the 500,000 bits of data we get each day, and there's no human interaction really within that, from data input to data visualization. So we automated that process. We made a lot of things more personal in terms of how we could communicate with schools, really small things like how we could produce certificates that were personalized rather than in any other way, just by the data that was already being entered in the system, but we could automate processes to improve that journey. And then the real exciting bit for me was how we could transform what we do. And like many during lockdown, we entered the world of online learning. The challenge for what we do in developing skills is that it's very difficult to do anything other than impart information if you have a very simple one-way online education tool. So we can tell people bluntly how to deliver a speech. We couldn't really tell them how they were doing. And that's one of the areas where AI has been transformative for us. By being able to ingest the data of a video, by being able to look at how we can classify that, how we can look at the transcribe it, look at the content and the structure of the speech, but also using AI tools to look at how that is delivered. So the tone of voice used, the visual side of it, and then being provide real-time feedback to young people about how they delivered their speech is probably, for me, one of the most transformative areas that we're using AI, and how AI can be used more broadly in education. The other side of AI that I think is really exciting and is probably applicable to everybody is how we're bringing in AI to help us on the qualitative side of impact assessment. So as I say, we work with 40,000 young people, they give us feedback, and we want to be able to understand what they're saying and how we can measure that impact, not just quantitatively, but pulling in what's a really large data set and summarizing, synthesizing, and learning lessons from that. And so that's the second area I've seen real growth in, how we're able to use AI much more broadly than just some of the generative examples that we'll see. I'll leave it there. We've got lots of other examples of how we're using it, large and small. But that's our story today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Russell. That was great. Okay. John, I don't know if you've got any questions before we open up for the room.
I think the last example there of taking qualitative data like freeform feedback and sort of analyzing that. That's a massively common scenario. I think probably all of the charities in the call have to do that kind of work. So I wondered if you might be able to say a bit more about how you're doing that, because presumably you get lots and lots of real-time insight from the events, and then what kind of tools are you using to do that process? It'd be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, so in terms of tools, we get feedback in a few different ways. So like many people, I'm sure, forms are filled in one way or another, and that data gets into a database. Predominantly, we use Airtable for a lot of the things we're doing. And the reason we use Airtable, it's a great relational database tool, but it's able to be played with. It's more configurable by people who aren't used to some of the big systems. So we use that to bring in data, to classify it. It has now got inbuilt AI tools. So, for example, really easy to do sentiment analysis of whether any feedback is positive or negative within the tool itself. But we also get an idea of what young people are talking about. So we get, during the year, 40,000 responses of what they want to talk about. That's really important for us to understand that, so we can feed that back initially to our trainers and also understand it centrally. So they will give a title of their speech. We pull that in, we summarize it each day, and we send out an automated email of what young people are talking about right now. We do that, I guess the system that it uses to classify that into the different categories sits on OpenAI, but now we've actually pulled that into Airtable as its own tool. And then we also, within our events, and this is the bit that to me changed perspective a little bit of what data is. So a lot of charities, including ourselves, would see data as what feedback we get on a form. But we then saw, well, actually the data is held within videos for a lot of what we do. So if a young person gives a speech, what they're talking about, their opinions, their perspectives, how they're giving that speech is all in video format. So we have a little workflow that's automated that pulls every video we get. It transcribes it, and then we use that transcription to summarize it, to get the key message, and then to synthesize that into something that's fed back to us and our trainers on the ground who are going into schools the next day, into what young people are saying about the key subjects that are important to them right now and what their perspectives are on them. So the glue in all of that is Zapier, because that helps someone like me who can't code connect different systems together. But we use a range of, I guess, AI-informed tools to pull that together into a workflow that's bespoke to us and what we do.
Great, thank you very much. I think Rona had a question, which I think, Rona, do you feel that that example that Russell laid out there gave a bit of a picture of how it's working in practice? So would you want to hear a bit more? Just checking. Okay. We'll assume yes for now, but chip in again if you need to. Chloe had a question, which I thought was an interesting one about your team's reaction, and has that been a positive one, or has there been a bit of reluctance or concern about AI?
I'm very fortunate in our team to have some, I guess, technophobes and technophiles, and I think that's really valuable in any team because it helps check and challenge some of the enthusiasm that people like me will have for technology solving our challenges. We personalized our AI. We have done with our automation. It's one of the things our automation did at the start was highlight little alerts where things hadn't been done. And people don't like that coming from the boss. But if it comes from Wilfred, our automation and AI colleague, it's a lot easier to see that we've got workshops where the trainer hasn't been booked or where there's a question mark and it's coming up soon. So we have tried very hard to have a culture of friendliness, imperfection, but also humor in how we've brought a lot of those tools in. And also, I talk about digital transformation at the speed of humans. And that's been really important, is that we've only introduced things that are mission critical and made them happen where it's super important. But we've started experimenting on what can enhance people's jobs and bringing that in gradually. And what we do there is we get gradual adoption and excitement about the different ways things can work. So yeah, at their core, there's a few people in my team who would be skeptical of AI in particular, and a few people who are really excited by it. And I think it's the cultural change is by not making it a threat, but seeing how it can empower everybody within their job, sharing, I guess, humorous but exciting examples of how we've used it in a positive way.
Fantastic. So Laura's got a follow-up about Wilfred, the personalized AI tool. Wondered what platform or system you'd use to do that with.
So Wilf works across all of our systems. He's the answer to everything we have. So he sends the emails that report on things. He sends an email every morning saying that he's an impact analyst and here's what we've learned from our work overnight. So he's really labeled as sitting over all of those things. So it's not a chatbot, it's not a tool, it's a name given to, I guess, the automation. If we said AI has produced this, then I think that's where we would get more resistance. So we use, though, for him to work, we use ChatGPT APIs that sit within that to interrogate our data to pull out. But we also use a number of other tools. I think one of the most exciting ones for me is a tool called Hume or Hume AI, which is a way of bringing in video content and looking at the emotional markers that video has, which is really useful for us because we want young people to be able to, when they speak, to be able to reflect in their tone of voice and their facial expressions, content they're delivering. But I know others are using this to be able to match the output of the user so that it is empathetic. So a lot of people talk about that as empathetic AI, of being able to use that. But coming back to the original question about how Wilfred comes about, it is a combination of every tool we've got kind of personified. So Zapier is used, Airtable's automations are used, pull together the various bits of data that we have as that super helper for all of us. And so it's seen as a helpful colleague for everybody.
Great, thank you. We might go to Ed in a wee second to talk a bit more about Plinth, but just before we do that, one quick question I had for Russell was just really around privacy policies and data protection questions and how you'd negotiated them, because obviously with video and generating a lot of data, there's potentially a question there about how that gets managed.
Yeah, it's massive. All of our stuff, I would say, at the sort of leading edge or bleeding edge of what we're doing is in prototype phase, has consents, etc. in terms of privacy. But it's a real question for us as we look to scale up. So we're talking to schools at the moment about how the tool we have to help young people develop, deliver, and practice their speeches can be done with that privacy in mind. So some of that we're doing, we do everything anonymized. We are doing some of that without the video aspects of it, where schools want, but building in clarity that AI is being used when it is being used is really important to us. Understanding the privacy of the tools that we are using and stripping out any personalized data is really critical to what we're doing. And I think as tools become more affordable for smaller organizations to have ring fencing around privacy, then that gives us the ability to scale. But I think that's a really good question. It's a really big distinguisher for me between larger organizations who may be able to have enterprise solutions where privacy is kind of embedded in the solution, and smaller organizations which are effectively using publicly available tools to piece together collaborative workflows themselves. So we certainly wouldn't say we've got it perfected, and it's not there in order to scale, but we use clarity and consent in order to overcome some of the issues that you may see.
Great, thank you. So I think what we'll now do is, because I think a few people are interested, Ed mentioned the example of plinth.org.uk, which is sort of, how things might go next. Do you want to say a wee bit about that?
Sure. I mean, in some sense, like this tool isn't that important in particular, but I think it's sort of an indicator of where things will go. Generative AI is a bit difficult to talk about in some ways because it's quite a sort of generic tool that does text manipulation, and mostly you see that either in somehow putting text in and getting data out, or putting data in and getting text out. And this, of course, can be applied anywhere. And the way that you see this applied in practice is exactly within sort of like setting up complex workflows within organizations. Where we've mostly seen sort of in practice, that tends to be like in larger organizations, tends to be people building more complex workflows in Microsoft 365, for example, which already has a lot of workflow automation tools. But this sort of allows slightly new things to be possible. But I can certainly see a time. Well, I mean, in a sense, this tool implies that time exists now, but it's still like, I mean, none of you would have heard of this very likely. Where you can really make your sort of case management tool also be your impact tool, and also write grants, somehow draft grant applications for you, because looking at the grants that are the foundations and things that are available, reading their mission statements, going through your cases and sort of suggesting things that might match in the right language now sort of becomes the kind of thing that's relatively straightforward to do, or at least possible, when it was completely impossible in the past. So I think what we'll see will sort of be like really surprising end-to-end integrations that just weren't available before. Right now, things are still quite piecemeal. It'll be like, well, I'm doing this one task and I'm going to see if I can sort of make myself 10% faster. But it's exciting to see where this might go in the future, and potentially allow people to do really quite a lot more.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So some exciting prospects there of a bit more integration, and I guess I feel again, charities do have a lot of qualitative data, but it's often quite laborious to access it or translate it into a new format for maybe for a funder or for something like that. So really interesting. Can I just check maybe if there's any other questions or queries, or should we go on, take the conversation we want to? So I think somebody was asking for a bit more on impact measurement, and maybe Russell, the question might be, you've obviously got the kind of live real-time stuff that's really exciting. Are you doing anything more in terms of using that for more structured reporting, or is that something that's still underway?
Yeah, so touches a little bit on what Ed was just saying. So on the quantitative data, we have effectively a vision of input once and then share where it's needed. So what we have on the website gives the headline data of what tens of thousands of young people are saying about before and after, that kind of stuff. Most people will have their own quantitative analysis. So that gets fed in by a form and used throughout the workflow so we can deliver it online. But actually, the reason for putting it online, as well as transparency, is an indicator of how we can use that with different funders. So pulling that data and creating automated reports on the quantitative side is one thing we do, but then the next level is, well, what underneath that and what can we learn from it? So we know that 40% of young people aren't confident in speaking in front of their peers, but actually very quickly we can understand how that refers by gender identity, it's by free school meal percentages, it's by different aspects. Now we can do that data crunching ourselves over time, but we can get that information automated, analyzed, and flowing into reports that we provide to specific funders on specific programs. The second is a bit of what you mentioned, John, is we get so many, whether it's endorsements, it's qualitative feedback, it's text-based stuff, and making sense of that is really hard. And still, we've got that a little bit siloed in different areas. But where we've started producing internal and for some funders that we're close to externally written impact reports is effectively taking the data from everything everybody said about the program, whether that's the young people, that's teachers, that's our alumni, synthesizing that into themes, giving example quotes from it, and producing a report which tells us how that program's going, who it's impacting, what they've said about it, what the common themes are, and what the learning opportunities are from doing that. And again, we've developed that in a bespoke way for us, but in a really simple way of the data fits in our table. We can take from the text base to summarize that through ChatGPT and then pulling back and writing that into a report that sits into another base within our Airtable infrastructure. So the hard work, the data synthesis in a way is done by the large language models that sit out there. I think the really important bit to charities such as ourselves and others is actually really understanding your data structure so you know what you can pull and what it's referencing into those systems to pull out those answers. But yeah, we're actually, I suppose, at the point we could write our impact reports almost automatically. We do want to have a little bit of a sense check before they go out.
Great. So I mean, that's really compelling, having that data, like so much data open and visible and live, where before there might have been quite a long lag between the activity happening and the insights being accessible. I wondered if having that capability, has that started to change the way you do strategy or activity at all? Has it kind of led to new ways of working?
So one of the really interesting things for me is when we fed in a lot of the speeches that young people give, is that we got a really clearer insight into the aspects of our program that we need to amplify, of what they're not great at, and where the learning opportunities are. And we could feed that straight back to the facilitators who are delivering our work. So I'll give you an example of that really compelling and may seem obvious, but when young people are asked to give a speech in front of their peers, they tend to speak really, really quickly because they want to say everything they have to say as quick as possible, and they don't pause. And when you see that in aggregate from tens of thousands of records, of video records, you start seeing the theme come in. Because we're able to take that data, you see how many words per minute, you see where the pauses are, you can bring that in as a real clear theme. And so you've got data and evidence to demonstrate where some of those issues are and perhaps where people can focus on. And I give that one because it's a really tangible example, but throughout the program, what we're learning about is what's important to people, how we perform on that, where the gaps are, and therefore it's up to us. You talk about strategy, how we can creatively develop our program. So that's useful for the learning side of impact measurement, as well as the communication of that. We've talked about impact support, but also how we're talking about the program we use with teachers, with funders, and more with politicians when we are talking about the impact that we have. And so really, I suppose the theme of what I'm saying around a lot of the AI we're using is synthesizing data that's just way too large for us to have ever done anything with, and starting to make that really useful by bringing it into formats that are useful for our own learning, our own development of our programs, and then external communication.
Thank you. And so Chloe's asked a little follow-up about has the much richer reporting enabled you to access funding that you couldn't access before?
Super question. And the honest answer is not directly. But I would say it changes the credibility when we have conversations with different funders. So being able to say that we are publicly displaying the good and the bad about anything that we achieve, that there's no filtering of our data, that we're not cherry picking the best stat we've got, but this is our theory of change and this is how we're doing on it. And to a specific funder, this is how we're doing on it with the projects that you're funding, I think has elevated the conversation we're having and the credibility that we've got with different funders, that the data is real. I think often funders will see, you'll pick out your best stat and you'll put it there in the presentation, but seeing that there's no filter to what we're doing gives them greater trust and confidence. But I couldn't point to one project and say, without transparent and live data reporting, they wouldn't have funded it. But I think increasingly, so it's two things. Increasingly, that's the way I see things going. And so I see that there'll be a bit more of a funder demand to see data in that way. And so I think we're helping them along. Secondly, the reporting requirements and time taken is just disappearing. So actually the administration of grant funded projects, it shrinks so much. You know, I've been in the charity world for long enough that used to sit there at the end of the project taking handwritten forms and typing it into Excel. The amount taken has been stripped away such that our funders can see a live dashboard of the impact of their project day by day.
Brilliant. Thank you. So what I might do now is to Ed or Ella, that example you chipped in about citizens advice and CADI, just to give you a chance to kind of give a bit more detail on that. And then I have got another question I was going to put to Russell, but we'll give Russell a bit of a break and go to Ed and Ella on CADI. That example there looked really interesting.
So I think this is interesting because it's collaboration between the Cabinet Office and Citizens Advice, and in some way, I mean, a lot of what we've been finding for people is they're sort of scared to do this in sort of in a really programmatic way, because it's still sort of quite experimental and they're worried about reputational risk. And I think you know, seeing this come from two very large organizations helped with that a bit, or at least we can all kind of watch them and see what happens. So this project is about automating customer service, or you know, or at least what you might call customer service, sort of in a commercial environment. So you know, answering people. And what they've done here is build a tool that called CADI that drafts responses. So this takes in you know, several large knowledge bases. It takes in stuff that's on gov.uk. It takes in stuff that's in Citizens Advice, and also takes in somehow the like the case information, and then draft responses for human agents to send. This is becoming relatively common in sort of the commercial world nowadays. A lot of the main tools have this built in, but you know, but we see in this context there's sort of like specific non-profit requirements, and what they've seen is it makes their agents about, you know, 10 to 20% faster, and in particular makes you know, new agents much quicker to get up to speed, and that's been their main takeaway. And so this has been like a prototype over the last few months. They're working on rolling it out across the whole of Citizens Advice. And also they're looking for other organizations with a similar kind of need, which is lots of people coming to them with complex questions. to trial with them. So if you do have that kind of issue in your organization, I would encourage you to reach out. And it's a nice like open source project which is being developed in the open.
Wonderful, great. Another Citizens Advice related example up here in Scotland is Citizens Advice Scotland developed an AI to use voice recognition. So in the pandemic, they had to switch from local in-person appointments to a national helpline. And the first iteration, that was very time intensive because you leave a message in, you get matched to a local branch, but it might take 24 hours. It required a lot of advisor time to staff the call center. And by using voice recognition, they could take somebody's postcode and say, right, if you're EH3, you're Edinburgh. And then that meant people got a direct connection straight to their local volunteer team. And it saved Citizens Advice Scotland masses of resource, which they could then use to kind of work on the actual live issues rather than doing the admin piece. So it's a nice example. And I think, Ed, your example does that as well, of automating the easier part so that the resource is there for the complex work. Great. So I'll just check now if Ella, if you want to chip anything else in, just to make sure we're not missing ideas that you wanted to contribute.
No, honestly, I think you all covered it all.
Great. And any other questions that some have maybe been sitting with people while we've been talking? Anything that you're wondering about, either from Russell and the examples he was sharing, or other examples that we've seen in chat?
I wonder, it doesn't necessarily be a question, but if anyone in the room has examples of tools that they're using at the moment, either if you want to unmute or if you want to pop it in chat, then it would be quite nice to explore what are people actually practically using right now. And I guess we're interested in both things that are sitting in that kind of experiment small scale space towards some of the end that kind of Russell's described, where it's kind of been quite transformational in the organisation. So take your time, pop it in chat box. That'd be quite nice.
While folk are right, so Liam's got an example of a grant management program. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Liam? Or
yeah, sure. It's I'm not going mad with AI with the use of it just yet. There is a use case actually that I can touch upon, but I work for an environmental charity called Hubbub. We found ourselves over the last few years as a re-granter. So we work with corporates, and often their ambition is to reach communities. So we do a lot of re-granting, and most of the tools that we use are sort of no-code tools like Airtable, Jotform, etc. And I've been sort of playing with prototypes to streamline and just create efficiencies to make just everything from the entire user journey a lot easier, from like the grant application process through to like the onboarding, paying of finance, etc. So there's been a lot of automations in the background, mainly through Airtable, to sort of connect all of the different tech platforms that we're using to make it as simple for the team to administer lots of grants, and then also to make it as useful for the end user. But what we found was like some of the limitations of the tool, all of the tooling that we were using. It's great and it's quite inexpensive, but we wanted to try and increase we wanted to make it more fair and equitable. So I've been creating an interface, so getting to grips with Airtable's interface function to replicate. I don't know if anyone's used the software Applied for recruitment, but they've got like a sifting process where you can score. You can do blind scoring. So if you're an applicant, you can answer 3 questions. Those 3 questions go to the reviewing panel. The reviewing panel do not see anything but that question against the set scoring criteria. So it's supposed to be a lot fairer, reduces any prejudice, etc. And I've been able to create a very simplified version of that through Airtable. And I'm slowly hoping to roll it out through some of our other grant programs that sort of will have a template that we can use with the automations and everything built in. And the AI aspect is I've been playing around with. I don't know if anyone else has been using Airtable's AI, but you can create AI text summary fields. So if you imagine, for anyone who's not familiar with Airtable, it's kind of like an Excel. It's like Excel on steroids, essentially, is how I describe it. And you can have a column that is a text field, and you can basically program the AI to read the application and produce a small summary against the set scoring criteria. Because what we find is we want to provide useful feedback to the applicants, but it sometimes can be quite time consuming to do that, especially if you've got 500-600 applications come in. So we can create the automation that will based on our instructions, it will pre-write a review of the application, what was good, what was perhaps not so good. And it means that you can edit, and it's a lot quicker. So yeah, I've been playing around with that. I'm hoping to roll that out soon.
Thanks, Liam. That was super helpful. And I've seen in the meantime, we've had a flurry of really interesting examples and thoughts. We should have asked this question earlier in the call. That's life for you. I think just to jump to a few, somebody talked about a really good example where they're doing complex formulas in Google Sheets, and AI is helping them with that. And rephrasing text is a common one. Dave is talking about using it to kind of draw on existing information to create kind of a personalized coach. So loads. If you're looking at chats, it's worth noting Russell has summarized the tools that they're using at Speakers Trust, so you can see in a bit more detail there. To just respond quickly to Jack's point, which is an interesting one about, he used to be a bit skeptical. Russell's changed his mind, so well done, Russell. But still wondering about where to begin. And I think a theme that I keep coming back to is, if you find yourself doing a task which is taking information from one format to another, or digging through lots of unstructured data and trying to categorize it, AI could be quite useful for that. Or if you've got a lot of routine communication, that's another one as well. Something that's happening in organizations I work with is a lot of organizations who give advice, they maybe have a call and a discussion and a meeting, and then they're then looking to kind of get a note or a summary of that. And transcription and summarizing tools can help with that. And a lot more coming through. So Laura, you put a point about there's so much. So and I know in Civic AI, one thing they've done recently is a big kind of roundup of how AI-enabled features are making their way into almost every digital product you can think of. And I think it's probably about going back to what's the biggest problems you got, what's taking up a lot of time. So I think the thing that Russell outlined really well was that they had all this data from the work that they're doing, but they didn't have capacity to engage with it on a real-time basis. So I wonder, Russell, maybe, do you want to just, as we wrap up in the last few minutes, talk a wee bit about what was the starting point? Was it kind of an individual who was very passionate about the potential, or was it a kind of particular thing that you looked at and thought, we should try AI to get us going with this?
I think for us, AI, we started same experimental way many people did with how we use GPT, answer questions, do generative stuff, help us from a blank sheet of paper to, write emails, write reports, and stuff like that. And I think AI, a great way to start is to look at how it's helping you on that individual level. I think the big leap for us was the combination, I guess, the title of your session today was how AI could be used with automation. And that once you've started playing with ChatGPT as a chatbot, you start saying, well, where would I want to do this more frequently? So it's marrying those two areas. The catalyst really is largely probably my creative thinking of what we always ask ourselves, what's the question? What's the way technology can help us achieve our mission, and what's the creative way we can solve that? But having tools, and I think there's a lot of advertising for Airtable at the moment, but having tools that are really simple to use, like Airtable, where you could just experiment with it and see what comes out, and then start seeing if that's a meaningful process that you can replicate. So I would say we're very much pushing from what we feel solutions will be needed to be able to invest more and more of our charitable funding at the coalface, And so improving how we do back-end processes, reporting, etc., by using tools that are out there to achieve that, and empowering the team we've got to solve, I think, Ed may have mentioned kind of the edge cases, you know, those difficult things that's really hard or where you may need more context. But it's been driven internally, really, of where we can see aspects of what we do at scale being able to be changed by bringing AI and automation together.
Great. We are now in our last minute, so we may need to wrap up quite soon. One thing I would say is I think Ella's slide where you highlighted the 3 things about have a policy, ensure it enables supervised experimentation, and there's a third thing which I've forgotten, which is probably the most important.
Start
It
with the
was
stuff that you already
know your
have.
tools. Yeah,
Start with
which
where
it
you
sounds
are.
like
Brilliant.
it sounds like
Yeah.
everyone has that on this call, at least
Yeah.
in the chat, which is
But
great.
it was really nice seeing that on one slide, because that might not feel like a strategy, but it has a strategic kind of focus to it. You know, there should be some experimentation. It should be safe and supervised, and start with what's easiest to engage with rather than thinking you need to go and learn about the really difficult stuff, which will probably become easier in 6 months anyway. Okay, I'm aware we've got to 11 o'clock. It feels a bit like we could probably keep talking for longer, but we want to respect people's diaries, especially those of our speakers who have kindly given time to us today. So I just want to say a real thank you to everyone for your engagement. Do have a look at the chat, because there'll be a lot of resources in there. The recording from today will be on our website in a day or 2. So thanks again to everyone. A really interesting discussion. We'll see you again next time. Okay. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.